I entitled Going on a Wing in a Prayer. And I did not invent that. That was a long time ago that was said. But I feel that it's an appropriate title for what I'm going to be talking about, which is basically my story, what happened. I went to church basically all my life. The Methodist church as a child and a young person, the Baptist church when I was at Craig Air Force Base in pilot training, and the Episcopal church when I was at Big Spring, Texas, finishing my pilot training. My parents wanted me to finish my education before I went in the military. And I followed their suggestion and did that. So I was completely finished with law school before I ever went into the Air Force. Of course, I knew I was going to go. The draft was in place then. And I had my draft notice before I actually went into the Air Force. I went to school starting in 1947 when I was 6 years old for 21 straight years until I was qualified in the B-52. I'm glad I didn't know that when I started out. It's a long time to go to school, but that's the way it was. I did have an experience out at Castle Air Force Base when I was in B-52 training. That's where we trained to fly the B-52. And I had been posted when I graduated from pilot training to go to Loring Air Force Base. Probably most of you don't know where that is or was, but it was at Caribou, Maine. And while I was at Castle, I got what they call a Twix from the Air Force, like a telegram. And it said that my orders were changed to go to McCoy Air Force Base at Orlando, Florida, which is where I went. That was a life-changing experience right there. Because if I had gone to Loring, it's very possible I wouldn't be here now. My life, that was one of the life-changing experiences that I had. At McCoy, we flew training missions and pulled alert. And I was on alert when the Apollo 11 launched to go to the moon with Armstrong and the men that were with him. I suppose most of you probably remember that. We watched it on TV in the alert building until the rocket fired, and then we went outdoors and we could see the fire going up through the sky. So I actually got to see them go their first mile. They went a lot of miles on that trip, but I actually saw them go the first mile. We lost an airplane at McCoy while I was there in 1968, which is when I got there in July of 68. Its number was 542667. And I had flown in that airplane the mission before the one where it was lost. And I was in it when it made its last landing. Of course, we didn't know it. We didn't know it. I was in another airplane when I saw it taxi out to take off. on its last flight. And of course, I didn't know it then either. That's what was gonna happen. And I was in another B-52 when they bailed out of it, out of 667. And nobody was killed, but I think one man broke his shoulder or something. But nobody was killed in that. I was called in. They had a board of inquiry. Every time one of those airplanes crashes, they have a board of inquiry come to the base where it was from. So they came and they called me in to testify. Now, I didn't have anything to do with it, but I was a new co-pilot, and they wanted to find out what did the co-pilots know about the electrical system of the B-52, because they thought that was where the problem was. And so I went in there and I had to put my uniform on and drive out to the base, and I went out there. And then this man, he asked me questions about the B-52 and about the electrical system. And I answered every question right except one. And the one that I missed was, he said, does the flight manual tell you how to manually parallel the alternators? They called them alternators on the B-52. They were alternating current generators, was what they were. There's 4 of them. And we always paralleled them together when we were getting ready to fly. And he asked me, he said, does it tell how to do that in the flight manual? And I said, I thought it did. Well, I was wrong. He come back and he said it doesn't. But he says, do you know how? And I said, yes, I do know how. And I explained to him exactly how to do it. You have these lights that come on, and you go from one to the next one, from one alternator to another one, and you hit the button when the lights are going off. That's when they're coming together. When the lights are going off, you hit the button to parallel the alternators. After I got done explaining that, he said, how did you find that out? And I said, well, they taught us at Castle. And when he got all done, he said, well, you've renewed my confidence in Castle. That's where I was in the training out there. So I think the Lord was behind that. He got me called out there because I have always been interested in electricity. And I read about it. I read about it before I was ever in the Air Force. So I knew a lot about electricity anyway. And our instructor on the electrical system out there, I considered the best instructor we had. So I felt that the Lord led in that particular experience. We deployed to Southeast Asia, that is, the whole squadron did, the 367th that I was in October of 1968. And I was a spare co-pilot. In other words, I was not on a crew when I went over there. And because they had gotten like 4 or 5 co-pilots in that summer of 1968, and there weren't enough crews for all of us to be on a crew. So after I got over there, they put me on a crew from Columbus Air Force Base in Columbus, Mississippi, and I flew with them for almost half the time I was over there. And then I was put on another crew from March Air Force Base, and then finally I was put on a crew from guess where? Loring Air Force Base. And first tour over there was over. Then the second time I went over, I was on crew. And so I had a more normal experience that time. There were 2 times that I was almost killed over there. I'm talking about Southeast Asia. And the ironic thing is, both of them happened on Guam, which you would think would have been the safest place that we would be over there. But the first time, and I can't remember for sure which one of these happened first, but I know they both happened on my first tour over there. There was a big building on Guam, and it was called the Compound. That's what everybody called it. It had a lot of rooms in it, and a lot of the crews stayed in that building. And I stayed there with a crew later after this happened. But I was not in that building at this time, and I knew that I was going to be deployed over to Thailand. And so, and I had, as you always do, you take too much stuff with you when you go a place like that, because you're going to be there for 6 months. And I had 2 bags that I was going to carry over to the compound. They had a storage place in there where you could put your stuff. And a lot of the crews did put stuff in there to keep it until when they were going to the other bases. So I'm walking up there, and it's dark, it's night, and it's dark. There were lights on the building, but no lights right where I was. So I'm walking up there, and this guy comes from in front of me. And I couldn't see him very well, but I could see that he was taller than me. And he said something to me, and I didn't understand him. And I said, say again. I said, what? I didn't understand you. He said, do you want to try me, mister? And he came at me with a knife in his right hand. Pretty big knife. And I dropped my bags and backed up. And I put my hands up, and he fell over my bags. And he got up, he got right up. I think he was drunk. But he got right up, and we stood there and faced each other. Him with the knife, I was unarmed. And he said, why don't you run? And I said, I'm not gonna run. And I said it right to him. And he stood there and looked at me. And I don't know what he saw, but all of a sudden he turned and went. He just turned and went away, walked away fast. And I stood there and watched him go. And then I reached down, picked up my bags again, and took them on up to where I was supposed to go. If he'd have come up behind me, he could have killed me, because I would have never seen him. And I couldn't, even then I couldn't identify him because it was dark. I couldn't identify him. You know, if I saw him later, I wouldn't be able to identify him. The other one happened there on the base also at Guam. This crew that I was on from Columbus, that's Columbus, Mississippi. They were getting ready to go back home because they had come 3 months before we did. So it was just before Christmas. And the guys were really, really insistent on taking as much stuff back as they could Because at that time, you could take, if you were in the service, you could take stuff back to the United States without having to pay any duty on it. And so they figured out, they made some angle irons. They welded them together and they put them in the bomb bay, the bottom of the bomb bay of the airplane, and then they put sheets of plywood on top of them. And they left room probably about 4 feet or so at the back end so that somebody could get up in there, and we loaded the bomb bay of the B-52 with all this stuff that the guys wanted to take home. And we had it full. And the guys had gotten out of the airplane. And I was the closest one to it. I was about 2 feet away from it. And all of a sudden, one of those angle irons broke, and that stuff all fell down out of the airplane. And fortunately, nobody was under it. But I was the closest. It come down about 2 feet in front of my face. And if I had been under it, I don't think I would have survived. So then we got in a pickup truck, and they were doing the same thing at another airplane. And we drove down there to where the other airplane was, and they had it loaded, and there were 2 guys standing under the bomb bay, and we started yelling at them even before we got there. We said, "Get out of there." And we told them what happened where we had been. But they got that one closed up, and it didn't fall free, fortunately. So that was just basically the 2 times that I almost got killed. Well, now I'm going to tell you the story of Kathy, the girl I met in Florida. And I met her, another family introduced me to her. And we dated quite a bit. I got to know her real well, and I fell in love with her. And I wanted to marry her, but she wouldn't do that. She didn't do that. But she had the most effect on my life of anybody that was not a member of my family. She was basically is the one who introduced me to the Adventist Church. And I can still remember when she told me that she was going to join the Adventist Church. I can still remember that, and that was 1 year before I joined the church. After I flew 117 combat missions over in Southeast Asia, 117 combat missions, 1 training mission, and 1 abort. The air conditioner went out, and we had to circle around and burn the fuel out of the airplane. B-52 cannot dump fuel. Tankers can, they can dump fuel. But the B-52 can't dump fuel, so we had to burn the fuel down to the highest weight that we could land the airplane. And but after we got back, after the second time overseas, we had an ORI. The ORI, Operational Readiness Inspection, where they come in, the Inspector General comes in, and they look all over the base, check all over the base, and then we had missions that we flew. We had, and I was on alert when the ORI started. So I was on the crew that I was on flew one of the ORI missions. And we flew out to Utah from Florida, where we had 2 targets that we were supposed to hit. And we had the pictures of the targets, and I studied the pictures. And so we flew the mission, got out there, and when we were on our bomb run, the navigators downstairs had trouble with the equipment on the plane. And as a result of that, we were pretty sure that they missed the first target. And the second target we were supposed to go to and drop on it. And I was in the seat, and the pilot was too. By the way, I got a magazine that's got a picture of that pilot in it. He was my last aircraft commander. And so we were up there, and all of a sudden I saw everything, just like the picture showed. And I said to the pilot, "We're there. This is it." And I'll never forget, he took his finger like that and he pointed at me and he said, "You've got it." And I reached my hand up and I hit the radio button. We never dropped anything on those practice missions. We would make the airplane would make a tone, beep, and when you stopped the tone, the radar station would then calculate if we had dropped, whether we would have hit the target or not. So we flew back. We had to fly all the way back to McCoy. It took about 3.5 or 4 hours to get back there. And we didn't know what happened. We didn't know what the result was. We landed the plane and we parked it, and we were getting out of the plane. And here comes a car. And it was the squadron commander. And he drove up the airplane and got out, and he said to the pilot, he said, "What happened?" And Major Stalker told him what happened. And he said, "Well, you hit the second target right on the nose. We missed the first target, but I hit the second one." And I think the Lord caused that too, because of what happened later. So we kept on. That was in the summer of 1970, and I was still there. I was still in the squadron, and we were having we were on alert. We had to serve. We would go on alert on Thursday, and then we'd be on till the next Wednesday, and then we'd have 4 days off. And while I was on alert, I started having this mental problem, this pressure, mental strain and pressure on me. And I never had anything like that before. And I first tried to ignore it, but that didn't work. And I ate my supper, and I talked to some people, and it mostly went away. But then I went back into the alert building. We slept in the alert building when we were on alert. We didn't go anywhere. We slept right there. And I went down into where the bedroom was, where I slept, and it came back, and I lost all hope. I thought, I don't know what's going on. And then it came to me that maybe I should pray. And so and I sat down on my bed, and I put my hand up like this, and I screamed mentally, not physically, but mentally. I screamed, "Help me, help me, help me." And it was like a light switch snapped off. It was gone. What was hitting me disappeared. It was gone. And I remember I took my hand down and I looked around. There's nobody else there. But I was smart enough not to say anything to anybody. You don't do that when you're in the military. You don't say anything. Keep your mouth shut. Anyone who might be in the military, take that as a advice. Keep your mouth shut. If you didn't break anything or hurt anything, just keep your mouth shut. And so as a result of that, I was still going to the Episcopal church there in Orlando, and I called the minister and made an appointment with him. And after I explained what happened, he said, "You have had a conversion experience." I didn't even know for sure what it had meant, what it meant. He said I had a conversion experience, and I think he was absolutely right. So I didn't know what to do, but I didn't say anything. And the next day, which I think was a Sabbath, I called Kathy. And I said, "I don't know why, but I need to see you today." And she said, "Well, I'm going to this evangelistic meeting this afternoon. If you want to see me, I'll be there." So she explained where it was. And I went there. And it was Rainey Hooper, and it was the first message of his evangelistic series. And the Lord made it possible. I attended every one of them. That was in August of 1970. I attended every one of his evangelistic series. And he would preach a sermon, and then he would have a time after that when he had a bunch of pictures, that showed the beasts of Revelation. And I didn't know it then, but guess who made those pictures for him? Pastor Seeley did. Which I found out after Pastor Seeley came here to this church. But anyway, he explained, he talked about the religious problems in Europe, and at first he didn't say who it was. But he didn't have to say who it was. I already knew, because I had studied history in college. It was the papacy. And he finally named that it was the papacy. So as a result, I was baptized on September 9th, 1970. So then I had to go back and deal with the Air Force, because I had received what they called a Palace Cobra assignment, where I was going to go to Cam Bay in Vietnam and fly the C-7A Caribou aircraft, which is a British plane, which the United States bought from them. And the only problem was I knew from being over in Southeast Asia United States, the Air Force base is shut down on the weekend, not in war. There is no weekend in war. There is no weekend in war. And I knew I wouldn't be able to keep the Sabbath. And so I told them, and they had a procedure for this. And the first thing they did was send me to a psychiatrist. And I went to him, and I had to go to the Navy base in Orlando in order to see the psychiatrist. And when he got done talking to me, he says, "There isn't anything wrong with you." And which I was pretty sure of that, but I wasn't absolutely sure. So then they sent the information to the Secretary of the Air Force. And his response to the information that they sent him he recommended that I resign my commission. And I can still remember when they told me that. And I thought about 10 seconds, and I said, yes, I will. So on the day before Thanksgiving of 1970, I drove off of McCoy as a civilian. Then, of course, I still knew Kathy, and I had proposed to her several times, and she always refused me. And I remember when I said goodbye to her, it was at night. And I don't remember, we'd been at some kind of a meeting or something. And I remember and I said goodbye to her, and I saw her drive away. Never spoke to her again. So I'm going to finish this by explaining how I started to sing. It actually began in Florida, because I was asked to sing in the church choir of the Forest Lake Church, which is the church I joined down there. And choir practice was always on Friday evening. They always had their choir practice on Friday evening, and I enjoyed going to that. But I came back to Findlay. I came back to Ohio, and then I came here to church, and also went to Marion, and I also went to Lima. But I'll tell you what, when I came here, I was sure this is where the Lord wanted me. And so that's why I joined here rather than either one of the other ones. I met Mary in 1976, and we were married on December 19th, 1976. And she passed away on September 5th, 2013. And that was the worst day of my life. No question. That was the worst day of my life. I decided to retire from farming at the end of 2019. And I have now worked for Charles over 50 years. Because I started with him in 1972. Well, it was on a New Year's Day, shortly after midnight. Mary had gone to bed, and I wasn't ready to yet, so I turned on 3ABN. And Steve Darmody, I'm sure probably everybody here knows who Steve Darmody is, he was singing. And while he was singing, the Lord spoke to me. He said, I want you to sing just like he's singing. And I said, what? And then I said, what can I do that somebody else isn't already doing better? That was it. Lord didn't say a word to me. And I struggled with that for a week. Didn't know what to do. And I made a decision. I asked the Lord for a sign. And the sign was that one of the morning song people would know me. One of them would know me. And I thought that's pretty safe. I don't think that's going to happen. But I got a surprise. In 2003, they had the ASI meeting down in Columbus, Ohio. And one of the people there was Jennifer Lamont. And she's a member of that group. And I was told that somebody had told her about me, and if I'd go and talk to her, she'd be good. I think her words were, she'd give me a big hello. And so I had to make another decision. And at first, my first thought was, oh, that'd be nice. And then all of a sudden, that's the sign. That's the sign. And I thought, am I going to go or not? And I decided, well, I promised the Lord I would. So I went. And I talked to her. And she was sitting on a stool, and there was like a thing here, and we were right at eye level. We were both at eye level. I was standing up. And I walked right up to her. She must have thought I was crazy. I walked right up to her and I said, do you know me? And she hesitated and she said, no. But she said, am I supposed to? She threw the ball back in my court. And I said, well, I was told that somebody told you about me. And she laughed. And I laughed. And when we got done laughing, she looked me right straight in the eye and said, yes, I do know you. You could have knocked me over with a feather. The Lord gave me the sign. So I said, okay, Lord, you want me to sing? I'm going to sing. And that's how it happened. That's how it happened. I am very, very grateful for the Lord. I had dreamed of serving my country by flying from the time I was a small child, because my dad had flown back in 1930. And I knew his story, what happened to him. And I wanted to fly also. And someday, I'm going to thank the Lord that he allowed me to do that. So, that's it. That's basically the story. That's how I got here. And I'll thank the Lord someday for that. I mean, in person, I hope. Yeah. Okay. Our closing song is number 520.